Hello everyone, Ace here, and today I've decided to have yet another look at some video game history, and in the process answer the question, what exactly made Warhammer 40K Dawn of War great? First released all the way back in 2004, and spawning multiple expansion packs and sequels, it's safe to say that the original Dawn of War truly stands as one of the greatest RTS titles ever to be created, a game that has had a massive influence on the entire genre. But to understand why this is the case, we have to of course look at what things made this game great. And the first thing that made the original Dawn of War great was the control point system. This may seem like a strange thing to focus on, but this is a feature that cannot be understated in terms of its impact on the RTS genre. It's important to note that typical RTS titles before Dawn of War based their economy around resource gathering, with titles such as the Warcraft franchise, the Command & Conquer franchise, and the Age of Empire franchise all doing exactly that. Admittedly, by the time of Dawn of War, there were some games, such as for example Rise of Nations, which began to mix up the formula a little bit with the cities system, but ultimately it was Dawn of War that truly popularized the control point system instead, making that system the mainstay of RTS games going forward. The control point system discouraged turtling and building your bases tall, instead in favor of map control. The control point system style economy allows the player to focus much more on combat and action instead of the economy, which brings me quite cleanly to the next thing that made Warhammer 40K Dawn of War great, that being that the game was a massive landmark title for RTS games from a technical standpoint. To say that the graphics were impressive in 2004 is very much an understatement, with the animations being a particular highlight, as was the fact that the game could allow thousands of corpses to stay on the map, whereas other games would simply have them disappear into the ether. If you're still not convinced about how graphically impressive Dawn of War was in 2004, then just consider the fact that it is one of the very few RTS titles to have gotten an M rating, a very rare feat for RTS games, especially from that era, despite the fact that RTS games have always been capable of being quite gory indeed. It's just that the graphics have typically not been impressive enough to really warrant an M rating. Speaking of impressive, let's move on to another thing that helped make Dawn of War great: the voice acting. This game has easily some of the best voice acting in any RTS ever created, period, which is saying something considering that RTS games are known for having really good voice acting. In fact, the only RTS game that can match Dawn of War in terms of quality voice acting would have to be Command & Conquer Generals. But while Command & Conquer Generals was going for a deliberately campy and over-the-top performance, which absolutely works for that game setting, Dawn of War's voice acting by comparison is sheer, unbridled epicness, which unsurprisingly perfectly fits the grim darkness of the far future that is Warhammer 40K. These are lines so memorable that fans will be memeing and quoting them until they're gray in the face, possibly while also listening to the game's soundtrack. And on that subject, another thing that made the game great was of course the soundtrack itself, made by the legendary Jeremy Soule. This music is easily some of the finest work that Jeremy Soule has created, which is a high bar considering that it's Jeremy Soule we're talking about. And if there is any single word that can best describe the game's soundtrack, it would also be epic, which again is exactly what is needed for a game like this. So far I've talked about the game's graphics, soundtrack, voice acting, and the economy. All things definitely worth considering, but now let's move on to another detail that made the game great surrounding the combat itself, that being the sheer amount of customization that was offered when it came to your units. Simply put, Dawn of War's unit roster has much more variety to it, specifically because of the sheer amount of customization available, allowing you to make very significant changes to how your units operate. The squad system and how it functions is an excellent example of exactly this, to the tune that your standard Space Marine squadron can become anti-tank specialists with you equipping a couple of missile launchers within their ranks. Alternatively, you could turn them into close quarters specialists with some flamers, or some longer range anti-infantry support with some heavy bolters, or even a combination of these various weapons. Needless to say, this sort of customization also applies to the vehicles as well, allowing you to swap out both the main armament as well as secondary weapons for alternatives. So yes, the fact that you can customize your units as much as you can definitely also helped make the game great. And of course, this customization fits perfectly with the fact that this is a Warhammer 40K game. And on that subject, another thing that of course helped make the game great was the fact that it was the first truly mainstream Warhammer 40K game. Now please note that yes, there were previous Warhammer 40K games. However, previous titles tended to be either rather niche, or in the case of, for example, Fire Warrior, just not good games. By contrast, Dawn of War was no such case, and was the game that introduced thousands, if not millions of gamers to the setting of Warhammer 40K, meaning that not only was Dawn of War a revolutionary title for the RTS genre, it also laid the groundwork for other Warhammer 40K games that came out after it, including 40K games that were not RTS titles. So needless to say, there is plenty to talk about when it comes to what exactly made Dawn of War great, but there is one final ingredient that I feel should be covered here, that being the mods. Dawn of War has had some of the most impressive mods ever created for an RTS game, with both Ultimate Apocalypse and Unification being some legendarily good mods that stand as among the greats even to this very day. These mods further expand the sheer scale of Dawn of War to the point of absolute absurdity, which again perfectly fits the setting of Warhammer 40K, keeping Dawn of War fresh and relevant even now. With these various facts in mind, this has been Ace, and I hope you'll agree when I say that Warhammer 40K Dawn of War is great.